It began not with a roar, but with a hum, low, haunting, and unnatural. At first, it was something you could dismiss. Maybe a machine, maybe the city. But as the hours passed, people across the globe heard it too. A global vibration, threading through mountains and oceans, echoing in the chests of children and the skulls of the elderly. Something beneath the earth, or far above it, was awakening. The first visual confirmation came from the Pacific. At 3:46 Universal Time Coordinated, satellites picked up an anomaly, a bright distortion in the stratosphere, as though someone had taken a knife to the sky and peeled it open. No explosion, no smoke, no thunderclap. Just a rent in the heavens, a shining, ragged scar slowly widening above the water. People watched live, not blinking, as something descended. The object didn't fall like a meteor or descend like a plane. It glided, silent and colossal, its surface alive with lights that moved in mathematical patterns. Estimates put it at nearly 2 kilometers in diameter. Its form was impossible to categorize, part crystal, part liquid metal, part machine-grown rather than built. Some thought it beautiful. Others were struck by terror. It floated miles above sea level, humming in the air like a god's heartbeat. Then, a blackout. Not of power, but of information. Global communications dropped in synchronized sequence. GPS failed. Military satellites were blinded. News anchors sat in stunned silence as their screens went dark. It lasted 30 minutes, during which humanity held its breath. And then, just as suddenly as it began, every screen flickered back to life, not with broadcasts, but with an image. The being who spoke to Earth for the first time didn't look human. It had no clear face, no visible mouth or eyes. Its form shimmered like stardust shaped by thought. It stood in a field of black, surrounded by stars not from our galaxy. Its voice came not through sound, but through vibration and light, translated into words on every screen in every language at once. People of Earth, you are not alone. We come not in conquest nor in mercy. We come because the silence is coming. That phrase, the silence, would become the obsession of every living mind. Conspiracy theorists screamed warnings into their microphones. Governments scrambled to decode the meaning. Scientists demanded data. But there was no further transmission for another 24 hours. The object, or ship, or entity, whatever it was, simply remained in the sky, casting a pale shadow over half the planet. Then it moved. Slowly, it shifted above the ocean, descending by a few thousand feet. A section of the structure opened, not mechanically, but as if a membrane had peeled itself back. And from within descended 3 figures, gliding on beams of pale light. They touched down near Hawaii, on a remote atoll cleared by rising tides decades ago. And there they waited. The U.S. military was the first to respond, of course. Jets scrambled, aircraft carriers reoriented, and elite strike teams were deployed. But none of them approached. Every system aimed at the entities failed. Lasers diffused. Targeting systems looped. One drone sent to observe burned out mid-flight. The message was clear: these beings could not be harmed. Not yet. Not by us. Under immense pressure, the President of the United States, along with several world leaders, agreed to send a delegation, not of soldiers, but of scientists, diplomats, and thinkers. Among them was me, Ava Chin, journalist turned historian, pulled from my comfortable irrelevance by a single message that appeared on my personal terminal. Ava Chen. You are requested by name. I wasn't special. I had no credentials to speak of. I wasn't a genius or a leader. But something about the transmission chilled me. Not just because of the request, but because the voice in that message matched the one from my childhood dreams. I arrived on the atoll by helicopter. The air was heavy and sharp, like ozone before a storm. The 3 beings were still there, unmoving. They stood in a perfect triangle, each at least 7 feet tall, their forms translucent, as though filled with galaxies. They had no weapons. No armor. Just presence, immense, undeniable presence. When I stepped forward, one turned its head, if it could be called that, and spoke directly into my mind. You were born from noise. You must remember. And then I fell. Not physically. Not mentally. But somehow, I fell into something deeper, a memory, or maybe a vision, or maybe a forgotten truth. I saw stars birthing suns. I saw ancient beings reaching across galaxies. I saw black tides swallowing light itself. And I saw Earth, a blue scream in the void, shining louder than any other world. I came to with tears running down my cheeks, unable to breathe, heart hammering in my chest. The being stepped closer and laid a hand, not flesh, not energy, but something else, on my shoulder. You have seen the first thread. You are a weaver. Your people must become loud. That was the moment I realized this wasn't an invasion. It was a warning. But what they were warning us about was beyond anything we had ever imagined. After the first contact, the world no longer felt like our own. The moment the Astrari returned to their ship in pillars of humming starlight, we all knew, every law, every border, every comfort we had taken for granted was now irrelevant. Earth had never been alone. And the beings who stood before us, taller than any tale dared claim, weren't visitors. They were warnings wrapped in wonder. Back on the mainland, chaos cracked open like a second sky. News outlets struggled to keep up. Governments released heavily sanitized statements. Peaceful contact, preliminary diplomatic success, no immediate threat. But their faces betrayed them. Military analysts whispered of technologies too advanced to comprehend. Religious leaders scrambled to interpret the revelation, split between divinity and deception. People across the world watched the skies with the quiet, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they were dreaming. I knew better. The touch of the Astrari still lingered in my mind like an echo you can't chase away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same visions. Suns collapsing into silence. Cities floating on rings of light. And then, always, the darkness, a tidal force without form or emotion, swallowing worlds with quiet indifference. The silence. I was taken to Geneva, to the Global Science Council formed just days before the contact. They wanted to study us, me and the others who had been touched. I wasn't the only one chosen. Artists, physicists, children, war veterans, people from every walk of life. We didn't understand why. Most of us had no ties to politics, science, or anything of strategic value. But the Astrari had chosen us deliberately. The scientists asked endless questions. What did the beings sound like? How did they communicate? Could we draw their symbols, explain their language? The truth was, none of us could put it into words. They didn't speak in language. They projected. When they spoke, it wasn't to your ears, it was to everything you were. You felt them inside you, like emotion given shape. They don't talk to us, I finally said during one of the interviews. They remember through us. That's when things started to shift. The council stopped treating us like witnesses and began treating us like vessels. A new kind of science bloomed, neuropathic resonance studies, designed to measure the impact of the Astrari's touch. Some of the chosen began exhibiting unusual behavior. One girl, age 11, began drawing mathematical constructs far beyond human understanding. A sculptor from Nigeria built machines in his sleep, machines that hovered silently, responding to sound. A linguist in Turkey started speaking fluently in a language that matched no known root but caused involuntary emotional responses in listeners. Me? I couldn't sleep. I dreamed of a sound. A single note, always growing louder, always approaching. It wasn't music. It was pressure. And I could feel something moving in it. Waiting. The Astrari appeared again exactly 1 week after their first arrival. This time, they came not to the atoll, but to orbit. Their ship expanded, visibly, impossibly, until it formed a ring around Earth. A halo of light that stretched from atmosphere to low orbit. It didn't interfere with satellites. It didn't project any known energy. But we could all see it, like a second moon that burned with quiet fire. Then came the second message. We must begin the listening. No explanation followed. No demand. Just that simple phrase. And then the dreams began. Millions of people, across continents and cultures, began reporting the same visions. A growing, pulsing eye in the void. A black river of stars flowing backward. A name whispered in the language of fear. The silence was reaching us, slowly, across the void, drawn to our noise. The listening, as it turned out, was the only way to prepare. The Astrari opened sanctums across Earth, floating domes of light suspended in places both remote and populated. Antarctica. The Sahara. The Himalayas. New York City. People were drawn to them like moths to a flame, and inside, they experienced what we had: visions, truths, possibilities. Each person came out changed, and not always for the better. Some emerged filled with purpose, eyes bright with understanding. Others came out broken, mumbling about silence eating time, about screams that never made sound. A few never returned at all. It didn't matter. People kept going in. Humanity was changing. And not everyone liked it. In the weeks that followed the emergence of the listening sanctums, the world split, not by war, not by politics, but by belief. On one side stood those who embraced the Astrari's presence, convinced that the visitors were guides, perhaps even saviors. On the other stood the resistors, a fast-growing movement who believed Earth was being deceived, infiltrated, even colonized. Their slogans echoed across continents. Earth for Earthlings. Silence the lies. No to the listening. It wasn't long before the first sanctum was attacked. It happened in the Andes, near an ancient Incan site where one of the Astrari structures floated in perfect stillness. Dozens of locals had entered its shimmering portal over the course of the week. Most returned, transformed, more focused, more connected. But not all were welcomed back. Some communities feared them. A splinter faction of resistors launched a coordinated assault with stolen military-grade equipment. Rocket fire struck the sanctum dead center. And nothing happened. The missiles simply slowed in midair, turning to ash like paper and flame. But the response was not retaliation, it was withdrawal. The sanctum dimmed and vanished, folding into a ripple of space that left only grass behind. No deaths. No counterattack. Just silence. That silence said more than any show of power ever could. The Astrari were not here to fight. But they would not engage on our terms either. To them, resistance was irrelevant. Earth could choose to listen, or not. But the attacks didn't stop. In cities across the globe, listening sanctums became targets. Some were destroyed, or so it seemed. Others defended themselves passively. A few unleashed effects no one could explain: waves of memory loss in attackers, spontaneous collapse of weapons into sand, dreams of drowning that lasted for hours after contact. Still, the resistors persisted. They claimed the sanctums were spreading a mental virus, reshaping human minds through exposure. And in a way, they were right. Something was changing. I saw it in the cities: artworks that spoke of other planets, children speaking in harmonic tones, entire neighborhoods forming, listening circles, where people meditated in unison, waiting for visions. Even nature responded. Trees near the sanctums grew taller. Birds began mimicking Astrari tones. And in certain places, strange new plant life began to appear, glowing faintly at night with bioluminescent patterns that matched no earthly flora. I began seeing others like me, those touched during first contact. We could sense each other without speaking. Something inside us resonated, like tuning forks made of memory. Some of us began to hear things, a pulse, a rhythm. We weren't going mad. We were synchronizing. One evening, I was drawn to a sanctum in Tokyo. It had appeared days earlier, floating above the Sumida River like a second moon. I arrived unannounced, and the moment I stepped inside, I fell to my knees. I wasn't alone. A dozen others stood within, eyes closed, breathing in unison. And in the center stood one Astrari, tall, radiant, its body humming like a chord played by the universe itself. "You begin to remember," it said to me. "What am I remembering?" I asked, the air around me thick with the scent of ozone and dreams. "Your place in the pattern." The walls of the sanctum faded, revealing stars. A river of constellations flowed beneath my feet. I saw not just Earth, but Earth's role. A node in a web of worlds, each once alive with thought, now silent. The Astrari had been tracing this pattern for eons, searching for one world loud enough to break the silence's approach. "You are not chosen," the Astrari said. "You are the noise that must become music." When I returned, my ears rang for days. Not painfully, but with clarity, as though a veil had been lifted. I could hear emotion in speech, truth behind words. Something inside me had changed forever. I wasn't alone in this. Governments began forming dedicated departments to study the altered. They called us conduits. Some feared us. Some wanted to use us. A few wanted to erase us. But more kept emerging, drawn to sanctums, awakening after contact. We were not becoming Astrari, we were becoming something else. Something human and more. And still, the silence crept closer. The Astrari shared no star maps, no timelines, no specific warnings. But they did say this: "You will know the silence when the stars begin to blink." The first star vanished on the 34th day after contact. Astronomers noticed it during routine observations of the Messier 81 galaxy. A bright giant visible for decades simply disappeared. No nova. No gravitational wave. Just gone. As if it had been erased from time itself. Then another. And another. By the end of the month, 13 stars had vanished across multiple galaxies. Not exploded, removed. The Astrari said nothing. But their sanctums pulsed more often. They began appearing in new places, underground, in oceans, even inside mountains. Some people began hearing the word threshold in their dreams. The world stood divided. One side pushed toward unity, acceleration, preparation. The 30th star blinked out the night before the threshold appeared. Astronomers no longer debated it. The disappearances weren't natural, weren't random. They were deliberate, surgical deletions of entire systems. Lights going out in the cosmic theater one by one. Each loss followed a pattern, no gravitational collapse, no light echo, just absence. The silence wasn't coming. It was already moving. And Earth was next. The Astrari made no announcements. No orders. Instead, a single accent, a message to every living being. In the plains of Mongolia, without warning, a new structure rose from the ground. No sound, no tremor, just emergence. Not built, not landed. Grown. A tower of impossible geometry, 10 stories tall, alive with shifting light. It shimmered in and out of phase with reality, visible in the corner of the eye before fully revealing itself. They called it the threshold. No one was invited, but people came anyway. Scientists. Spiritualists. Refugees from cities where resistors had seized control. The tower, as it came to be known, accepted all who approached. No guards, no lines. You walked in when it wanted you. And when you did, something changed. I went on the 3rd day. From the moment I stepped through its boundary, the world outside ceased to matter. The air was weightless. Time hung like mist. Inside was not a building, but a bridge of thought. The floor was memory. The walls were sound. Each step brought me face to face with visions, versions of Earth that might have been. A green planet wrapped in rings. A red Earth, burned and barren. A crystal Earth filled with light. And then I stood before myself. Not a reflection. A version. She looked older. Weathered. Tired. But her eyes glowed with purpose. "You're not ready," she said. "But you will be. You must be." "Ready for what?" I asked. She raised a hand, and the ceiling above us dissolved, revealing space. Earth turned slowly below, wrapped in a web of light. No, not light. Voices. Sound waves spreading in perfect harmony. "You are the pattern breaker," she said. "You were never supposed to remember. But the Astrari changed that." I reached out, but she vanished into strands of gold. Then came the voice of the Astrari again, everywhere at once. "This is the moment of choice." When I emerged, I wasn't alone. Thousands had gathered outside the threshold, and not all were peaceful. The resistors had arrived, armed and desperate. They called us silence walkers, claiming we had been brainwashed by alien lies. Tension snapped. The first shot wasn't fired by them. It came from a government drone trying to deter the advancing crowd. The drone exploded midair. A pulse from the threshold turned its metal into petals, drifting down like ash. But the resistors took it as an attack, and chaos ignited. Gunfire. Screams. A rush of bodies. But the threshold reacted. In a flash of silent brilliance, the area was bathed in blue. Everyone froze. Weapons fell apart in people's hands. Voices caught in throats. The entire scene held in suspension, as if the Astrari themselves had pressed pause. And then came the final warning, spoken not in words, but directly into every human mind on Earth. The silence feeds on division. You must become louder than fear. The threshold remained, untouched, humming like a heartbeat. In the days that followed, something incredible happened. Nations began sharing secrets. Scientific breakthroughs once buried under patents were made public. Rival governments opened shared labs. The UN was replaced by a new body, the Harmonic Accord. It was less a government and more a chorus. Not every nation joined, but enough did to matter. The resistors went underground. They called it betrayal. Submission. But the world was too changed to go back. Too many had seen the edge of the void and stepped back with eyes wide open. I still don't know if the Astrari saved us, or simply pushed us to save ourselves. But I knew this. The real test hadn't begun. It was still coming. From beyond the edge of known space. The silence.it began with the whales. One morning, marine biologists stationed off the coast of Australia reported that humpback whales had changed their song. Not subtly, completely. The new vocalizations mirrored patterns identical to Astrari communication tones. At first, it was dismissed as a coincidence, or perhaps human influence through all the exposure to Astrari frequency patterns. But then the dolphins followed. Then orcas. Within 2 weeks, ocean life across the globe began to hum in unison with melodies no sonar array had ever picked up before. The Astrari called it resonance. Your world is beginning to remember, they said. It was never asleep. It was only waiting for you to listen. Earth was changing, not just its people, but the planet itself. Forests near sanctums began to grow in strange geometric patterns. Bioluminescent moss appeared in high-altitude caves. Fungi began clustering in shapes that resembled Astrari script. And across every continent, humans began reporting the same dream on the same night. We stood in a black void, looking up at a spiral of stars. From the center something moved. A shape darker than the dark. It pulsed with hunger. Then we heard the first true sound of the silence. Not a roar. Not a scream. An absence. A lack of everything that makes sound possible. A hollow so vast it felt like your soul falling through your own chest. The Astrari summoned the conduits, those of us who had been changed by contact, touched by thresholds, awakened in the sanctums. We were called to a chamber in orbit, aboard the Astrari's great vessel. It had hovered in the upper atmosphere for months, silent and enormous. We called it the Halo. None of us had seen its interior. Until now. We were brought up not by ship, but by thought. One moment on Earth. The next aboard. It wasn't metal. It wasn't architecture. It was living space, color, sound, memory, and presence, woven into a physical place that adapted to our emotions. My breath caught as I stepped inside. The floor was soft beneath my feet, like warm crystal. Walls breathed. Light responded to our heartbeat. In the center of the great chamber stood the core Astrari. Taller than the rest. Brighter. It felt ancient, but not old, like something that had existed before time decided to move forward. You are the last variable, it said. The silence consumes those who settle. You persist because you do not. What do you want us to do? I asked. Be louder. That confused many of us. But then it showed us, through memory, shared vision, A living data stream poured into our minds. The silence had consumed thousands of civilizations, some more advanced than us by millennia. It never came in ships. It came in thought. In forgetting. In surrender. It silenced the drive to create, to question, to change. Once a world stopped moving forward, it was already dead. Your chaos is your shield, said the core Astrari. Your disagreement. Your emotion. Your refusal to settle. You are flawed, but your flaws are noise. And noise is resistance. They showed us something else. A projection. An event horizon. The edge of where the silence would soon reach us. A wall of nothing slowly closing in. We had less than 1 Earth year. Maybe. What happens if we're not ready? Someone whispered. There will be no sound left to ask the question. The Astrari could not fight it. Their defenses, technological and mental, could slow it. But not stop it. They believed humans, in our evolutionary chaos, held the one trait that had never appeared anywhere else: refusal. Not courage. Not hope. Just the inability to give up. They launched it from beneath the ice. An old Cold War facility, buried and forgotten in the Arctic Circle, had become the resistors' final stronghold. There, cloaked in silence and desperation, they assembled the reset. It was not a bomb in the traditional sense. It carried no payload of fire or steel. Instead, it was built on stolen fragments of Astrari tech, dark matter lattices, resonance dampeners, memory disruptors. A weapon of anti-thought. Its purpose was horrifying in its elegance: erase the patterns that connected humanity, reduce the harmonic chaos that protected Earth. Silence the noise. They believed it was salvation. The reset launched under cover of a polar storm. It rose into the upper atmosphere unnoticed by radar, its signature masked by Astrari-derived cloaking. No one saw it coming until it was only minutes from detonation. But we felt it. Every conduit on Earth, every person who had stepped through a sanctum, who had listened at a threshold, woke in unison with a splitting ache in the center of the skull. A piercing stillness. Like a song being sucked from the air. A few collapsed. Some screamed. I dropped my glass in the kitchen and heard nothing, not the shatter, not my breath, not even my own voice when I called for help. That was how I knew it had begun. I ran outside and looked at the sky. And there it was, a pale black sphere rising slowly above the horizon, like a second moon that had forgotten how to shine. And I knew. If it detonated, it wouldn't just kill sound. It would kill hope. Connection. Memory. Everything that made us us. The Astrari did not interfere. They had warned us before. This is not our battle. You must resist it in your own way. And so we did. Not with missiles or interceptors. But with noise. Across the globe, conduits gathered. In fields. In cities. On rooftops. And they began to sing. Not in harmony, not with words. Just pure, chaotic sound, frequencies human ears couldn't parse, languages not yet born, raw emotion turned to voice. Drummers followed. Artists painted in a frenzy. Children screamed and laughed. Priests rang bells. DJs mixed tones that hadn't existed a week ago. The world became a riot of color, vibration, fury, and beauty. We had become the resistance. I climbed the tallest building in my district and screamed with everything I had. Not out of fear, but out of defiance. We're still here! I shouted. We're still thinking! And then the reset flickered. One by one, the conduit's combined output began to warp the energy around the weapon. We couldn't destroy it physically, but we could rewrite its resonance. Bend its silence back on itself. And we did. The reset quivered, slowed, and then began to disintegrate. Its black shell fell away, reduced to stardust, dissolving like smoke under the full light of human defiance. When the silence broke, the sky exploded with sound. All across the earth, instruments played themselves. Birds burst into song. The oceans sang in deep harmonic pulses. Cities trembled with music no one had composed, but everyone recognized. It was the sound of survival. of life refusing to go quietly. The resistors vanished after that. Some were arrested. Most simply disappeared into the wind, their vision of peace through control shattered. No one hunted them. There was no time. The stars were blinking faster now. The Astrari told us what we already feared: the silence was accelerating. Earth had delayed it, disrupted it. But we hadn't stopped it. Soon, they said, you must face it directly. And we would. We were no longer preparing. We were becoming. The first tendrils of the silence reached the edge of our solar system on a cold Tuesday morning. It didn't come like an army. There were no ships, no forms. It arrived as a void, a measurable deadness in space, eating radio waves, crushing gravity patterns, folding time into stillness. Probes sent to observe it stopped transmitting, not abruptly, but slowly, as though they simply forgot how to speak. The Astrari called it the horizon fall. We gathered in what was once Geneva, now the seat of the harmonic accord. I stood with other conduits on a platform that shimmered with Astrari code, each of us pulsing faintly with inner resonance. We no longer needed translation to speak with our celestial allies. We had become bridges, between human and beyond. You are ready, said the core Astrari. But no one felt ready. Then let us speak, I said. And we did. Earth's collective voice rose, not in violence, not in war, but in creation. In that final moment, all of humanity became a single song. Satellites amplified it. Subterranean chambers harmonized it. Even the sanctums joined in, glowing like beating hearts across the continents. It wasn't just music. It was will. Defiance. A billion different sounds refusing to be silenced. And when the silence reached us, it meant not a quiet world, but a storm. It struck Mars first. The planet, long cold, long forgotten, resonated with stored memory, music broadcast years ago by rovers, recordings of orchestras, whispered messages from astronauts who had died dreaming of more. Mars sang. Venus followed. Then Earth. The impact wasn't physical. It was conceptual. An attempt to override us. And it failed. Not because we fought harder, but because we changed faster. The Astrari watched in awe as Earth glowed with chaotic, dazzling light. Language fractured into innovation. Emotions broke into new art forms. People dreamed things that had never existed before. A child in Kenya composed a sound that bent infrared. An old man in Peru dreamed an equation that reversed entropy, at least for a moment. The silence touched us, and recoiled. We were too loud. Too alive. The silence paused, for the first time in its endless, patient devouring. And in that pause something broke. The void blinked. Not the stars this time, but the silence itself. And from that fracture came sound. The sound that emerged from the fractured silence was unlike anything we'd ever heard, not music, not static, but a layered tone that carried with it a question. It vibrated in the bones, curled in the mind, and echoed across the fabric of everything that lived. It wasn't words, yet we understood. Why do you fight? For a moment, the world stilled. Even the Astrari paused. The silence had never spoken before, not in any language, not to any world. It had consumed countless civilizations without uttering a single phrase, erasing the light of 1,000 cultures as if they'd never been born. But now, faced with Earth, it asked. I stood in a chamber of light aboard the Halo, surrounded by other conduits, the core Astrari, and billions listening from below. My body trembled. I didn't know if I had the right to speak for an entire species. But no one else moved forward. So I answered. Because we do not know how to stop. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. But the moment I spoke, my voice became many. 1,000, then 1,000,000, then the full roar of a species that refused to fade. The words rippled through space, translated not into language but into experience, our defiance, our flaws, our art, our wars, our resilience. We break and rebuild, I said. We fall and scream and hurt and keep going. We don't fight because we're brave. We fight because we're unfinished. The silence trembled. It tried again, reaching into us. pulling at memory, at loss. It showed us death, sorrow, genocide. It whispered that we were not worthy, that we were chaos in a universe seeking order. And we showed it a newborn crying, a poem scribbled in the dark, a cracked photograph held in shaking hands. We showed it hope. The silence recoiled, not in pain, but in confusion. And then the Astrari sang. Their song was nothing like ours, older, structured, beautiful in ways our minds could barely hold. But for the first time, they changed it. They let Earth's noise into their song. Imperfect, clashing, unpredictable, ours. Together, we sang into the silence. And it listened. The void didn't vanish. It couldn't. It was part of the universe. But it stopped advancing. Like a predator blinking at prey that had grown teeth. Not to destroy, but to understand. For the first time in eternity it paused. And in that pause, we made something new. Not a weapon. Not a wall. A beacon. The Astrari helped us weave it, part machine, part idea, part emotion. A pulse sent into deep space. Not to hide from the silence, but to answer it. Not with fear, but with a challenge. We are noise. Come and see. The silence retreated to the edge of perception. The Astrari, their mission complete, began to fade. Not into space, but into us. Some remained. Others dissolved into the fabric of the sanctums, now quiet and still. Their last message echoed not from ships, but from within the hearts of those they touched. You are no longer alone. And then the sky cleared. Stars returned. Earth spun on, louder than ever. We were never the strongest. We were never the wisest. But we were something new. The first species to make the silence ask a question. And in that, we became something greater than a world. We became an answer.